I guess there are five things I would like to outline as part of my substance behind that brief answer. And the first of all, I guess, before I go into any of the five parts, I should probably say, as an economist, that the true answer should be that we don't know the answer to any of these things. As this crisis has demonstrated yet again, as we saw in 2008, there are huge things about aspects of the world that are extremely unpredictable, and none of us have any knowledge as to when these things happen or quite what the path after these events happen end up being. But we all have to try our best and use the tools that we are trained and experienced to use. So with that in mind, let me try to outline my main ideas. So first of all, I'm in the camp that thinks in 2021 we will probably have, particularly in the second half of the year, a quite vigorous economic recovery. And let me try to give some substance to that. First of all, if you really look at the world as a truly global unit and think of it as an average of all the different major countries and regions, economic activity in two places in particular, and to some degree, some others behind it, but in particular the US and China, tend to typically drive what is the performance of the world economy. And as we've just seen with the estimates of the latest data in China for December, turning the year into 21, and for the average of the year, miraculously on some levels, China actually ended 2021 from a GDP perspective actually stronger than it did before the pandemic started. And China these days is, of course, the second biggest economy in the world in nominal GDP terms. And in PPP terms, it's the biggest. And it looks to me as though China's starting 2021 growing by something in the vicinity of 6.5% to 7%. And it could be China's best growth rate, ironically, for a long time. The United States, particularly talking on the morning after the coincidental, and congratulations for the timing to you guys in this regard, to coincide with the inauguration of the new president. But this morning and later today, I suspect, we'll see a lot of Wall Street research firms and sell-side houses revising higher their US economic growth forecast, primarily because of the likely fiscal stimulus that is coming pretty soon. And the United States, in my opinion, has a good chance of growing by also levels of GDP growth that we've not experienced for a very long time. And if you put the two of these countries together, certainly based on the last decade, they account together between them something close to 3/4, if not more, like 80% of all global growth. And then in addition to that, you got to look at India as the second most important of the BRIC countries in terms of size. And of course, some other important developed economies, perhaps, particularly the EU. And their growth might not be as vigorous as in China and India, China and America, but I think in India, depending on what I'm going to talk about next, vaccines, India could have a big recovery from its weak economic performance in 2022. And so in that sense, I think it's important to understand, and linking it into my second point, that the nature of the 2020 crisis is really, even by the standards of any crisis, quite unique, insofar as most of it was caused by a deliberate closing down of many aspects of our economies. And I know it's obvious, but I think when a lot of people talk about what will now happen and the economies and society in general, people seem to be forgetful of the fact that during this closing down of the economy, that the personal savings rates in many, many countries has risen to extraordinary levels, including in places like the UK, where I live and I'm from, and the United States, which we are just simply not used to. And that is because most of us haven't been able to spend on many of the items we would normally choose to spend on. And even with the challenges of working, and in some cases, in many cases, unfortunately, people losing their jobs, the fact that savings rates have risen so sharply, in my opinion, is a very important part that I think some of the pessimists for 2021 are missing. And I say that because going back to my opening comments of I don't really know, and nor does anybody else, what really matters, in my opinion, is the speed and success and efficacy and usefulness of the vaccine rollouts, which has just got underway in recent weeks. And I think it is quite likely that those countries that have the greatest success in rolling out vaccine coverage as early as possible are likely to see the fastest economic recoveries, particularly early on, because of course it will allow their governments to start opening up parts of their domestic economy. But crucially, it will also allow individuals and consumers to have a lot more confidence that there could be an end to this dreadful pandemic. And with it, encouraging them to start reducing these very high levels of personal savings. And in that context, I think there could be a very strong rise in personal consumption in many, many parts of the world in 2021, particularly from spring onwards in the Western world and maybe in some parts of the rest of the world. And as again, I emphasize, aspects of it are already taking place in parts of North Asia, particularly in China. And I would expect in coming days and weeks, we see more and more signs of the Biden administration wanting to recommit America in the middle of global policy cooperation. And I would not rule out the possibility that they try to encourage and persuade Italy to actually have an emergency G20 meeting earlier than the one that is planned typically for the middle of the year, in order that the Americans can send out this message of constructive support to the rest of the world. I hope I'm right, and it seems to me the markets are certainly anticipating some of that kind of flavor if you look at how they've responded to the comments of Biden in his inauguration speech and the announcements that have been made since. The last thing I want to just finish on briefly before I turn it over to hopefully some Q&A. If I put all of this together, especially if I'm right about central banks remaining so friendly, this is an almost textbook perfect support environment for that of so-called emerging markets. In fact, when I really look at it closely, it is so scarily positive. It does make me think something must go wrong at some stage, because life is never that straightforward. But if you combine a strong, vigorous cyclical recovery that is supporting commodity markets, a very stimulative monetary and fiscal policy, and a behavior of the dollar that is, let's say, not strong, but is either stable or declining, these are all historically extremely supportive factors for so-called emerging markets. And I certainly believe over the early part of 2021, as we've seen, this is something that is set to continue, which should be a very good backdrop for many financial markets around the world, crucially, including for all of you there in India. At some point, this nice scenario won't persist. My suspicion it's going to be a bigger issue for 2022 than it is certainly for 2021, and especially the early weeks and months. And so with that, let me stop there. And thank you again for asking me to talk. I hope I've given some provocative ideas, and I look forward to trying to answer any questions that come my way. Thank you very much.